Today I want us to talk about humility and pride. When we are thinking about God's thoughts about ourselves and learning to think the way that God thinks about us, humility and pride are a result of thinking the way that God thinks. Well, not humility and pride, but humility is a result of that. Pride is a result of not thinking the way that God thinks. We could define humility simply as proper thinking about yourself. That's not probably the most helpful definition of humility, but I want us to understand where humility comes from. And it comes from thinking about ourselves in the right way, in God's way. In Romans chapter 12, in verse 3, Paul says, "For I say, through the grace given to me, to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, as God has dealt to each one a measure of faith." We're told here that we're not to think of ourselves more highly than we ought to, but to think soberly, to think correctly, to think with a clear mind about reality. That is what we must do in order to understand who we are, our importance, and how that relates to God, how that relates to those around us. But we have to think of ourselves properly. When you think about pride, honestly, it comes from poor memory. And that might sound strange. How could pride come from poor memory? Well, think about the Israelites. In Deuteronomy chapter 8, in verses 11 through 14, this is what God said to them. This is before they entered into the land of Canaan. He says, "Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments, his judgments, and his statutes, which I command you today, lest when you have eaten and are full and have built beautiful houses and dwell in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and your gold are multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, when your heart is lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage." And we'll continue this in just a moment, but you notice that he's saying it's when you go into the land and then you become successful. Everything's going well. You're getting rich. You have comfort. All right. Then in verse 15 through 18, you forget the Lord your God, who led you through that great and terrible wilderness, in which were fiery serpents and scorpions, and thirsty land where there was no water, who brought water for you out of the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you, and that he might test you, to do you good in the end. Then you say in your heart, "My power and the might of my hand has gained me this wealth." And you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. He says, be careful that you don't forget. When you become successful, don't think my power and the might of my hand has gained me this wealth. Remember where you came from. Remember what God has done for you. Remember that he's the one who gives you the power to get wealth. You wouldn't be where you are at all if God had not carried you through the wilderness and caused you to make it through alive. And so their pride would be a result of a poor memory, you might say, of forgetting what God had done for them. If they really remembered what God had done for them, then how could they actually have pride and say it was all me? In Hosea 13, verses 5 through 6, we unfortunately find this is exactly what did happen. It says, I knew you in the wilderness, in the land of great drought. When they had pasture, they were filled. They were filled, and their heart was exalted. Therefore they forgot me. Yeah, when they got to the land and they had everything to make them comfortable, they had everything good that God had blessed them with, well, they became proud and forgot God. They forgot that God is the one that led them through that wilderness and put them in the place of goodness where they were. You might have heard this type of a statement. Some people would say, I'm a self-made man, or maybe a self-made woman. And that's a statement that comes from someone who forgot how they got where they are. There is no such thing as a self-made man. You didn't create yourself. You didn't raise yourself as a child. You didn't provide those things. You didn't teach yourself everything. You learned from others, even if they weren't actively teaching you in a school, but you still learned from others. Maybe you read books, but you still learned from others. There is no such thing as a self-made man. We need to realize that any success we have in life is built on top of what we have received from others, especially, of course, what we have received from God. We wouldn't even exist without Him. We find this problem in 2 Chronicles 26, verse 16. This seemed to be a common problem among the kings in Judah. Uzziah was one that was faithful to God. God blessed him very greatly. He became very successful. But here in 2 Chronicles 26, verse 16, it says, But when he was strong, his heart was lifted up to his destruction, for he transgressed against the Lord his God by entering the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. Now, Uzziah was king. He was a very powerful king, a very blessed king, and here he wants to worship God in a certain way. But it was not according to the law. He was not a priest. He was not allowed to burn incense. And he tried to force his way there, and the priests actually came and blocked him from doing it, and he became angry with them, and so God struck him with leprosy. But you see that when he became successful, when he was strong, his heart was lifted up. He became proud, so that even he committed sin against God in the way that he tried to worship God because of his own pride. In 2 Chronicles 32, in verse 25, we see the same type of idea about Hezekiah. Hezekiah was king of Judah, and Isaiah the prophet told him that he was going to die. Well, Hezekiah prayed to God. He had been a good king, a very righteous, very faithful, and he prayed to God to spare his life, and God listened, and he sent Isaiah back to him to tell him that he would have 15 more years to live. But here in verse 25, it says, But Hezekiah did not repay according to the favor shown him, for his heart was lifted up. Therefore wrath was looming over him and over Judah and Jerusalem. He actually became prideful when God gave him this great gift of 15 more years to live. And thankfully, it seems that he did repent before his death, but he did damage to himself, to his family, and to the nation during this time when he became prideful. We can look at the things God has blessed us with, and instead of being thankful and humbled by it, we can instead forget the reality, not look at things properly, and become prideful. of, well, I must be somebody special for God to do this for me. And so he did not behave in the way that he should have because of his pride. Pride really makes us see things incorrectly. You can think of this group of girls in this picture here. They're rather full of themselves, prideful, as they think they are. They're trying to look attractive and fun, and maybe they think that they're somebody special just because of their appearance or whatever it may be. Plenty of women are like that. All right, this is nothing new. Look at Isaiah chapter 3, verse 16 and 17. Moreover, the Lord says, because the daughters of Zion are haughty and walk with outstretched necks and wanton eyes, walking and mincing as they go, making a jingling with their feet. Therefore the Lord will strike with a scab the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will uncover their secret parts. Or other translations say, make their foreheads bare, make their hair fall out. They're very proud of their appearance, and they think that makes them special. They don't realize that that has nothing to do with what makes someone special or worth anything. And so the Lord is going to discipline them by making them ugly, is the idea here. He's going to make it where they're not going to want to take a selfie, right? They're not going to, if a woman's hair falls out, she has scabs all over her head, that's not the time she wants to take a picture of herself to share with everyone, to show how attractive she is. So this is the idea that we need to look at things properly. Just because we may be with a group that values physical appearance too highly, we shouldn't let that affect our thinking about it. Physical appearance is not what makes us special. It is not what makes us worth something. And as Daniel's been talking about marriage, that's very important for us to keep in mind. Don't think that you're going to attract the right type of person because of your physical appearance. That's never going to happen. You're going to have to work on the things that are actually worthwhile in order to attract someone who is worthwhile. Don't be like these women in the pride as they walk down the street. Don't be like that. In Daniel chapter 5, in verse 19 through 21, we're not going to read all of this, but this talks about King Nebuchadnezzar. It's referring back to what had happened to him. And if any human being had a right to be prideful about what they accomplished in life, I imagine Nebuchadnezzar would be one of them. Because he absolutely was successful. He was a mighty king who conquered anywhere he wanted to go. He was just, he had a huge city, beautiful city. And you could definitely say, well, he has a right to be prideful, to be proud of what he's accomplished. And yet that's not true, because even with him, everything that he had accomplished was because of God, even though he didn't realize it until it was explained to him. But it says in verse 19, because of the majesty that he gave him, or that God gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whoever he wished, he executed. Whomever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he set up, and whomever he wished, he put down. So that was his situation. You can see why it would be easy for him to be prideful. And it did happen. In verse 20, but when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne. And we know about how he became like a wild beast until he acknowledged that God is the one in charge, not him. In James chapter 1 and verse 17, we're told every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. Every good thing we have in life is a gift, and it is from God. When we have pride, we're not looking at things properly. We are sort of blinded to reality, to the reality that the good things we have are from God. And we end up thinking that we provided those things for ourselves, which is nonsense. But pride makes us think nonsense. In James chapter 4 and verses 13 through 17, he talks about those who seem to think that they have control over the future. And so he says in verse 13, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, and make a profit. Whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. But now you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. You do not know even what tomorrow will bring." So when you're boasting about what you're going to accomplish in the future, you are not looking at reality. You are not looking at what is true. Your mind is corrupted by pride, and you are blinded. You're not able to look at things properly. You can't say, well, this is what we're going to accomplish, because you have no idea what tomorrow will bring. We know that God is the one who is in charge, and so we say, if the Lord wills. We have that humility to know we are not the ones in charge. God is. Humility is required to have true glory. Now, when we think about glory, we might think about pride. It's an accomplishment. It's honor. That's where pride comes from, isn't it? Well, not really. Not true glory. True glory is what we receive from God, the honor from Him. And if we're getting honored by God because we do things properly and we think properly, well, we're going to be like those 24 elders in the book of Revelation who had their thrones and had their crowns, but they laid their crowns down before the throne of God and said, He is worthy of all glory. We'll have glory from God, but when we do, we're going to know that we don't actually deserve it, but we'll be thankful for it. Still in James chapter 4, if we back up a bit, in verses 6 through 10, it says, "But he gives more grace. Therefore, he says, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore, submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Lament and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning, and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up." If you want to truly be lifted up, you cannot lift yourself up. Because if you do, God is going to push you down. God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. It's not something we deserve. But if we are humble, he will lift us up, and we will receive that glory of being approved by God. In Romans chapter 2, in verses 5 through 11, he talks about the day of wrath that is coming. And he talks about, we'll each receive according to our deeds. But in verse 7, he says, eternal life to those who by patient continuance in doing good seek for glory, honor, and immortality. That's how we seek glory, not through pride, but in continuance in doing good. Those who have pride are in verse 8, those who are self-seeking and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, will receive indignation and wrath. So we want to do what is good, having humility, and know that we will receive great things, great blessings from God, glory from God, more than anybody who is prideful will ever receive. So when we think about pride, the only way we can really have pride is when we forget how much help we have had to achieve success. If we have pride, we won't see things the way they truly are. We're going to not listen to other people when they tell us how things are because, well, obviously we know better than them, and we even think we know better than God, just as Isaiah tried to offer incense when God clearly said only the priests were to do that. Pride keeps us from recognizing reality. We must have humility in order to achieve true greatness and receive that glory in eternity with God. God only is going to give it to those who remember what he has done and appreciate it and act on it. And so if we remember what God has done for us, there is absolutely no room for pride. We will have thankful humility. Thank you.